welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I thought we would take a little trip back to 1912. While I was researching the Merlin house, I ended up going into some newspaper archives, and I actually found quite a bit of information on the area around the Merlin house, but then something came up very strange that I wasn't actually looking for, but it was in the Grants Pass newspaper, which was this story out of Chicago that was about a murder-suicide, and then eventually the school was determined to be so haunted that they ended up just completely demolishing the school. And so that was super intriguing to me, of course, so I decided to do a little bit more research on it. So a little bit of a tale to tell you. Before I do that, I thought I would talk to you about a couple of apps that I downloaded just to see if they would work mostly. And quite honestly, I feel like every single ghost app is just crap. I downloaded one though that I'll pull up. So I actually downloaded about 6 of these apps that you can see, and only one of them actually asked for microphone access, which I found skeptical. I don't know if suspect. I found it suspect, not skeptical. But the one that I did find interesting was the SBX12 Spirit Box. Now, this also doesn't ask for microphone access. I haven't fully researched this, but I feel like how else, how is a spirit going to manipulate this? Do they have suddenly the ability to manipulate an app without having voice recording? I don't know. It seems very strange to me. But anyway, the way that this one works is you just hit the button and your phone has to be not on silent. And supposedly this filters through FM and multi-channel radio waves, which again, I find suspect because that's not how it works on an app. So no microphone access, but allegedly, you can control the speed, the volume, and then words are supposed to come through to you based on what the spirit's trying to tell you. I think that a lot of it works on human psychology, to be honest, because when I was testing it on my drive home, I asked it what my name was, and I heard Kirsten 4 times, but I think I was hearing what I wanted to hear. And then I also heard the name Kelly, which is my mom's maiden name, and so I was like, I think I'm just hearing what I want to hear, so I don't know. But anyway, that's my short review on this. I really don't think that it's worth much, just because it basically doesn't even access your microphone, so I don't know how a spirit could communicate like that. Alright, so back to today's story. So on January 19th, 1912, a man by the name of Sylvester Adams came to this small schoolhouse that Miss Edith Smith taught at, and it was soon to be the scene of a horrific murder-suicide. It was in Warrenville, Illinois, which is about 31 miles outside of Chicago, which is where Sylvester Adams was actually from. So there's some conflicting information on what the name of the school was. There's a few articles from back then reference the Matthew School. A lot of them just refer to it as the Cooperation Schoolhouse. And it was about 10 miles from Wheaton, Illinois, and about 1.5 miles from the village of Warrenville. She taught there for about 9 years prior to her murder. She was 33 years old, and she was a very well-loved fixture of the Wheaton community. So, strangely enough, Edith had met Mr. and Mrs. Sylvester Adams in about 1906, and the women became quick friends. They corresponded a lot by letter, they exchanged Christmas gifts, they went to social gatherings together, and so of course Mr. Sylvester Adams, the murderer, was around her quite frequently. At some point he became completely infatuated with Edith, and he would later write her crazed love letters that she was not responding to, or she was responding to in a way to get him to stop. It's unclear how long this went on based on the stories that I read, but essentially the day after Christmas in 1911, she wrote him basically telling him to stop, and if he was a gentleman, he would leave her alone, and she wanted nothing to do with a married man. So shortly after, within weeks of that letter being written, on January 19th, Adams arrived around 2 p.m. at the Cooperation Schoolhouse. The students reported hearing him stomping his boots as he ascended the stairs, and when he entered the schoolhouse, he gave her a nod of like, hello. And students said that she didn't return the nod, and she actually seemed very flustered and frightened. So keep in mind that this was about 2 hours before normal school dismissal, but rather than dismissing the children right then, Edith made a decision, likely based on what she thought was best, which was to continue as usual, and she didn't dismiss class until 4 p.m. With that in mind, Sylvester Adams sat in the back of the room menacingly on a bench for the entire 2 hours until they were dismissed. The children that were interviewed reported feeling uneasy and scared. They felt that he was a very threatening presence. Now, at one point, there was also a report that he had gotten up and bolted the schoolhouse door shut, and a little girl got up and actually unbolted it and sat back down. And who knows if he was going to try to kill all of the children and Edith, but perhaps that girl's small but brave act saved them. Regardless, he didn't get up the rest of the time, according to reports, and just sat there waiting for school to be over. Now, Sylvester Adams was born in approximately 1863, and he had a wife and 2 children in Chicago. They lived in an area of Chicago called the Oak Park area, and he was known to be a very loving and kind husband. His wife had been going through an illness that he had been there for her through the entire thing, and he worked for the stage line, and so he was just well respected in the community, and nobody saw this coming except Edith. So on the morning of the murder, Sylvester Adams boarded a train for Wheaton at the Fifth Avenue station in Chicago with only $1.20 in money in his pocket, or so his wife reported. She told reporters and police that the morning that he left, he only took 25 cents with him, which was normal for his fare to and from work. But when he died, he was actually found to have $500 on him in the form of a check. Reporters thought that perhaps he planned on forcing Edith to elope with him, and that was going to be their money to start over. Other people speculated that perhaps he was planning on killing her and then making a run for it, and that would be his money to start over for himself. What struck neighbors of Mr. and Mrs. Adams as odd is that they were referred to as the lovers. They were very affectionate, kind, loving people, and their marriage seemed very picture perfect. And I think that it did to Edith too, because in her letters to him requesting him to stop, she is almost taken aback by the fact that he would even want to step out on his marriage. So at 4 p.m., Edith decided to dismiss school at the regular time, and all of the kids seemed to hurry out very quickly because they were scared of this man that had entered their schoolhouse. Now, one boy stayed behind. His name was Willie Kronig, and he was 14 years old. And he stayed behind because he sensed that something might be wrong and that this guy was out to do harm to his teacher. He stayed long enough just to see Adams try to grab Edith's arm and then eventually her purse. And as soon as he realized that there was going to be a problem, he took off running to a nearby farmhouse that was next to the school.
Help! Help!
This was the home of Mr. Otto Seehauser. Willie reached Otto just in time for 2 gunshots to sound from the schoolhouse. They both fled to Edith's aid. When they arrived, the scene was horrifying. Some reports say that the schoolhouse door was locked and that the police were the first to see them, but a report that I read that was straight from Mr. Seehauser and Willie were them finding the bodies. It's also conflicting on where they were found. A couple of them said that it was in the doorway that both of them were, but the most complex story that I read said that Edith was lying in front of her desk with a gunshot wound to her temple, and Adams was nearby on his back, more towards the entrance of the schoolhouse. and he too had a similar injury that both were fatal, obviously. Now, they could tell, both police and onlookers who were first on the scene, that there had been some sort of a fight. Chairs were overturned, Edith's desk was completely awry, ink was spilled everywhere, her hair was disheveled and ripped apart, and seemingly she had torn buttons off of Sylvester's vest trying to fight him away. So after that, the only thing that the police did was call the coroner in. There was no investigation because it was a very clear murder-suicide. They did find also on Sylvester Adams a note that Edith had written to him that was a decline of his love, essentially rejecting him, and a note that he never sent to her, but that he carried with him, that basically said that if she didn't go with him and marry him, that something was going to happen to her. Obviously, this hit a small town very hard, especially since the teacher was very well loved. But a month passed by, it was February, and they had hired a new teacher to take Edith's place at the school because regardless of how sad they were, they had to carry on with life. Shortly thereafter, reports began to circulate that both the teacher and the students were too afraid to enter the schoolhouse anymore. Apparently, Edith wasn't ready to leave. Students reported seeing her looking at them through the schoolhouse window, and some reports state that Sylvester Adams' boots could still be heard walking across the schoolhouse floor, always halting at the teacher's desk. The new teacher reportedly felt threatened constantly and couldn't stand to be in the classroom to teach classes. It actually got so bad that the teacher and the students went on strike, refusing to go to school in that building. As reports increased, the authorities of the town met and decided that the only thing that they could do to fix this problem was to destroy the school. They hoped that erecting a new one meant that the old ghosts wouldn't follow a new building. It took them over a year to come to this decision, and at that point, the story of this haunting had begun to spread nationwide. I found reports of this all the way from Illinois to Oregon to California, with reporters talking about this haunted schoolhouse in Illinois where students were so scared that they wouldn't go to school. They would go to school at a nearby school in Aurora, but they refused to go near the schoolhouse. Eventually, people were so afraid to go near it, based on their own experience and not just hearsay, that the school started to fall apart. And essentially, the only thing that was left of the schoolhouse was Edith and allegedly Sylvester Adams' ghosts. Now, I fully understand that mass hysteria is a thing, especially in a small town when we didn't fully understand everything about the world. But so many of the reports were from personal standpoints that I find it highly unlikely that people just made this up, especially to go so far as to strike to go into the building. There really was nothing to be gained there because both the teacher and the students ended up in new schoolhouses, and they still continued the strike well after. So it's not like the kids were just trying to get out of school. They actually were putting more stress on themselves because they were having to travel so much further to get to school. Now, in the fall of 1913, the original schoolhouse was razed and a new schoolhouse was built in the same exact place. From what I can tell, the haunting never really made the newspapers again, but I did find some eyewitness testimonies that they still were seeing her ghost on the school grounds, out in the play yard near a tree, and even farmhouses near the area reported hearing gunshots and screaming very often. So it makes me wonder if simply removing the building doesn't remove the haunting, because there are still remnants of that memory there, and obviously it was a lasting impact enough that either Edith's memory or her spirit couldn't let go. Now, it's not uncommon for buildings to be torn down after such a tragic incident, but I do think it's a little bit uncommon, even in the 1900s, for it to be solely based on the reason that it's haunted. And all of these news reports literally refer to the school as the haunted schoolhouse. It's almost like it just became fact. After it was torn down, like I said, everything kind of died off in the newspapers, but it makes you wonder if Edith still roams the halls of the school that now stands in its place. I didn't find very much information on Edith or Sylvester Adams. The only thing that I could find on him was that he had been married to his wife for 9 years. They had 2 small children and seemingly were very happy. And obviously he must have lost his mind. His wife, in talking about this to reporters, was actually informed by the Chicago Tribune that her husband had committed this murder, but they didn't have the heart to tell her that he also had committed suicide. She was reportedly hysterical during the interview, just knowing that her friend had been killed by her husband, understandably. And she said that she had a feeling that something had happened, which makes you wonder, how much did she really know? Did she know that her husband was pining after another woman? And what sort of ghosts now are in their old house? And I tried to find it, and either the addresses have changed in that area of Chicago, or maybe their house was also torn down, but I didn't really find anything. But perhaps that's a story for another time. Regardless, obviously a very senseless tragedy for no reason other than a love spurned and an old man essentially taking it out on a young teacher. Now, if Edith and Sylvester Adams are still haunting that schoolhouse, it makes you hope that she is not trapped there with him and that she is able to find some sort of peace to move on past her senseless death. So guys, that's all I had for this episode, or this video, whatever you want to call it. I will continue to have more stories coming up. I'm working on the next episode in the series for the Merlin House story, where I'll tell you a little bit more about the physical manifestations that I dealt with there, and a little bit more of the backstory that I found while I was researching this. If there's anything that you guys want to hear about or you want me to research, make sure to comment down below. Otherwise, make sure to subscribe and like, and I will see you guys next time. And as always, don't turn out the light.